Welcome back to Regaining the Balance, and this is Matt speaking, and today we're going to continue with our studies into early Vedic religions and ideas, reading straight from the text, getting a little bit of spiritual insight into it from this person who wrote a blogspot, MS Srinivasan, on the gnosticpsychology.wordpress.com site, which I will link to you guys if y'all want to take a look at it, but I'll be reading it out off of this article, so you probably don't need to. Anyways, this will be important because like the Bhavishya Purana that I read in the last video that I did, this is going to be continuing to connect some really old ideas, metaphors, things like that within these texts. And we're going to sort of like continuously be pulling on these threads as we move along, but they're all going to be important. So let's get into it. The legend of the lost herds. The main theme of the legend runs somewhat like this. Panis are the robbers who steal the herds of Indra and hides them in a subterranean dark cave. Indra deputes Sarama to search for the lost cows and bring them back. Sarama goes in search of the lost cows. After an arduous journey and crossing the mighty river Rasa, Sarama discovers the Kina imprisoned in the dark cave of the Pani. Sarama charges the Pani with theft. She orders them to flee from the place, leaving the cows to Indra, or else face the consequences of the wrath of the impressible hero, Indra, who will pounce on them with his friends Angirasas and Navagas, and destroy them. But Pani boasts their power, strength, and treasure, and tries to tempt and induce Sarama to stay with them as their sister. Share their treasure with them and not to betray them to Indra. But Sarama refuses to be tempted, returns to Indra and reports the discovery to him. Indra, along with Angiras, following the trail of Sarama, enters into the cave of Panis, slaying the robbers, recovering the lost herds, and drives them upwards. An interesting part of the legend is that the dialogue between Sarama and Panis, which, apart from its deep psychological and spiritual significance, is full of wit and humor. We reproduce here this dialogue from the Rig Veda. So, quoting from the Rig Veda, quote, "With what intention has Sarama come to this place? Verily the way is long and losing itself in the distance. What is the motive of they coming to us? What sort of wandering was there? And how did you cross the waters of the Rasa? I come as the appointed messengers of Indra, desiring, O Pani, your great hidden treasures. Through fear of being crossed, the water helped, as thus I passed over the waters of Rasa. What is Indra like, O Sarama? How is the look of him, as whose messenger you have come to this place from afar? Oh, let him come by all means. We will make friends with him. Let him look after our cattle. I cannot think he is a person to be subdued. He is one to subdue others. He, as whose messenger I have come afar. The deep stream conceals him not. Slain by Indra, O Panis, you will be prostrate. These are the cows, O auspicious Sarama, which thou desirest, having traversed round and round the ends of heaven, who will give them up to thee without fight. And our weapons are sharp indeed. O words, O Panis, are no substitute for armies. Your sinful bodies may not be pierced by arrows. Your track may yet be unassailable for an invasion, but mind you, the Lord of the gods will spare neither. This treasure, O Sarama, with its cows, horses, and riches, is quite secure in the mountain stronghold. Good sentinel are the Panis who guard it. Alas, in vain didst thou come to this far-off land. Roused by the Soma, the Risis, Ayasyas, and Girasas and the Navayagas will march against you here, and this treasure of Kine they will snatch and share. Then, O Panis, you will eat these words of yours. After all, Sarama, thou hast come hither constrained by divine pressure to return not. We will make thee our sister, and we shall set apart a share of cattle for thee, O good one. Brotherhood or sisterhood I know not. Indra knows, and the fierce Angirasas, desirous of cattle, they will beside you as I get back to them. Hence, O Panis, Run away, run to a distant spot. Make haste, O Panis, to a far-off place. Let the kine step forth in due order, the kine which has been hidden, and which Bharaspati, Soma, the rishis have well earned. This is the legend which was repeated many times with different variations. In some versions of the legend, the hero is not Indra, but other gods like Agni or Brihaspati or Angirasas rishis. The villain of the story is not always the Pani, but Vricha or Avalas. The recovery of the herds is always accompanied by the setting of the dawn. By the setting of the dawn and the rising up of the sun hidden in the darkness, quote unquote, suggesting that there is a sun hidden in the cave of the Panis and released of the waters of heaven. Now, I think this is very interesting because this story has a lot of different elements with Plato's allegory of the cave as well. So here we go, a little bit of esoteric explanation. What does this legend convey? Let us look closely and deeply the various characters and events of this legend in the light of Sri Aurobindo's interpretation and see what the legend reveals. If gods are the powers of the superconscious light, Panis are the power of the unconscious darkness from which evolved the universe of matter, life, and mind, described by Vedic sages as robbers of light. In the human being, these dark powers are lodged in the subconscious cellars of our being. Panis are described in the Vedas as robbers who steal the herds of the sun and hide it in a dark cave, which means they steal the luminous rays of the superconscious light. Cows are the herds of the sun. Sun is the symbol of the superconscious light and hide it in the subconscious caves. They also described as miser traffickers who do not or cannot or refuse to sacrifice. And we'll be getting into that in future videos as well. This means, in the psychological sense, Panis represent the power which drive the life of the greedy, selfish, possessive, and sensational physical vital ego in man, which is ever willing to take but unwilling to give. Even when the human soul and the higher mental and emotional being turns to the higher spiritual values, this part of being controlled by the Panis represents a formidable obstacle to the sincere and wholehearted consecration of the will to the higher life. It brings and subtly mixes its lower ego motives with the higher parts of the being. It either refuses point blank to give its consent to the higher ideals, or when the higher parts pretends to consent, professing lip service to the higher ideal, but refusing to live in practice, even when it seems to open its consciousness to the higher parts and its ideals. It insists either openly or secretly for some form of concession or compromise of the ideal with its lower motives. Even when it begins to open its heart to the higher spiritual forces, it tries to appropriate the great light and force for its own egoistic enjoyment and refuses to give or surrender to the higher light. Now, mind you, this is an interesting story. It's obviously has an allegorical spiritual sense to it as we're reading here. But I think one of the things that we should all definitely pay attention to is that when you're reading a lot of these old texts, there's always like a bad civilization, and and many of them spend a lot of times, poo-pooing, so to speak, these civilizations and the kind of people they are and all this other stuff, while at the same time they're almost in a way integrating and or ripping off parts of their civilization for themselves. And we're going to see that over and over and over and over and over again ad nauseum, as the many videos I have planned will be sort of laid out here. But what's interesting here is that these people and these Panis, as we'll see probably in the next video, on a historical basis, were like basically the people who lived in India when these Aryans arrived. And we're going to see that they weren't a bunch of idiots. They were actually very smart and civilized and had their own sort of ideas about stuff, which is part of the reason why there was a huge dispute between these people. And that is going to be very interesting to delve into, because that in a lot of ways is the catalyst for history. So continuing. The roots of this lower physical vital sensation, ego in man, is mostly sunk in the subconscious. Whatever may be its outer conscious professions and pretensions, its actions are driven by the powers of the subconscious being in man. There cannot be any genuine spiritual transformation of human nature until this part of the being is freed from the is freed from the pull and the clutch of its subconscious roots. Otherwise, if the seeker makes no attempt to conquer and transform this part of his being, it may sometimes lead to an appropriation of higher spiritual forces for an intensification of the lower nature of man in some spiritual disguise, a sacrifice to the Panis in the name of gods and not to the true gods. The Hound of Heaven here. The figure of Sarama, quote-unquote, the Hound of Heaven, represent the intuitive discrimination which exposes the subconscious roots of our being and its powers and workings and its hidden treasures. The slaying of the Pani by Indra represent the release of the mind and the soul of man from the clutch and the pull of the subconscious knot in man and the release of the higher psychological and spiritual potentialities which were hidden and held down by the physical, sensational, and subconscious life of the skin, encapsulated body, consciousness in man. As Sri Aurobindo sums up succinctly in the inner significance of this Vedic legend, quote, the subconscious darkness of the ordinary life of ignorance held concealed in it all that belongs to the divine life, and these secret riches must be recovered first by destroying the impenitent powers of ignorance, and then by possessing the lower life subjected to the higher, unquote. The dialogue between Sarama and the Pani conveys all these ideas in a figurative and symbolic language. We can see that the Panis, the powers of darkness, are strong and powerful, full of ruse, cunning, and stratagem, sarcasm, and mocking wit. They do not always oppose the powers of light, but try to make them the accomplice of their lower motives. Then they try to corrupt and bribe Sarama and ask her to be their sister and share the treasures with them. In another version of the legend told in the Brihadevatha, the story takes an amusing turn, but still significant and instructive. In this version, Sarama actually succumbs to the temptation of the Panis and drinks the milk given by them and finds it, quote, excellent, charming, delightful, stimulating, unquote. When Indra asks Sarama, you have seen the cows, I hope, unquote, she, under the influence of the Pani, replies, no. Indra becomes angry and kicks her with his foot, and Sarama vomits the milk. But out of fear for Indra, guides him to the cave of the Pani, and there the Indra slays the Panis and recovers the cows. The version of the legend shows that the intuition-like reason can also be misused and corrupted and become an accomplice of lower motives. Just like reason, through material science, technology has discovered the secret laws of matter and released the tremendous potentialities and energies hidden in matter. Psychological intuition can release the still more enormous potentialities and energies of our inner being. And I would absolutely agree with that. But just like the material science and technology, it's constantly being misused to serve the lower motives and enjoyments of the lower nature in man and become an instrument of Asuric powers. The higher knowledge, and Asuric means demonic, the higher knowledge and energy released by intuition can also become an instrument of the Pani. But the happy ending of the legend conveys the truth that the sun-eyed gods can never be deceived neither by reason nor by intuition, and these powers of the gods, though they may be temporarily tempted and misguided by the dark powers, will ultimately be forced to serve the divine purpose of the gods. These are, of course, some of the general psychological truths of spiritual life, and most of which are well known to all yogis and mystics who have tried the spiritual path, attained to a higher level of consciousness. And here we have the rescue of the light. The unique discovery of the Vedic sages is the intuition of the rays of supreme light hidden in the subconscious roots of our physical being. This means that sun, which is the source of all light, is not only up above in the highest heaven, but also down below, hidden and involved in the nethermost darkness of the subconscious and inconscious. So this is a direct kind of idea of as above, so below, just so you guys know that. And boy, do I have some stuff with that coming up. The Vedic sages describe the caves of the Panis as, quote, cowy wideness, unquote. which means wide and luminous with the rays of light. The practical implication of this discovery is that the key to the riddle of existence and the supreme spiritual transformation lies not only up above the superconscious, but a crucial part of it's hidden in the subconscious. One of the main conditions of the conquest of Swar, the highest worlds of the superconscious sun, is that the herds of the sun, and later the sun itself, hidden in the subconscious cave of the human being, has to be released from the Panis and driven upwards towards its home in the superconscious. And there's one other thing I want to point out too, guys, is that this text has a lot to do with cows and herding and stuff, because a lot of these people this was a pastoral society, and so it makes sense that a lot of the spiritual allegorical stories are set in pastoral settings, very much like we see in the Old Testament as well. So just going to want to point that out. The second related intuition thrown by this Vedic legend is the psychological and spiritual powers hidden in matter of our physical consciousness. The home of the Panis is described as a rocky cave or mountain stronghold. The rock and mountain in the Vedic symbolism represents matter. The cave of Panis represents the inconscious or subconscious foundation of our physical being and the material universe. The Pani caves are full of cows, horses, and treasures, which means a subconscious root of our physical being contains hidden within itself immense psychological and spiritual potentialities. And as Jesus once said, the kingdom of heaven is within you, right? So in the later period, this intuition was further explored by Tantric Yoga, which gave the highest importance to the human body and conceived the vision of Kundalini's Shakti, the bioplasmic energy of the body coiled at the bottom of the spine and potentially containing within itself the psychological and spiritual potentialities of the human being. And we're going to get into that a lot later, because that's really going to play into connecting how these two different civilizations kind of broke from each other and continued evolving their religious ideas separately, influencing each other. But the whole part here with the Kundalini and the body coiled at the bottom of the spine, we're going to see that in Egyptian, Chaldean, Phoenician, Mayan. I mean, we're going to see this in so many different civilizations. It's going to blow your mind. Anyways, continuing, the second suggestive idea thrown by the Vedic legend is that a complete transformation of the subconscious root of the individual seems to be an integral part of the Vedic idea of spiritual self-perfection. Not only the soul, but also the mind, life, and body and their faculties have to be totally released from the limiting and perverting influence of the Pani, and have to be given up to the gods, the power of the superconscious. In other words, not only the soul released from ignorance and raised towards the superconscious, but the human nature made up of the body, life, and mind have to be liberated from the subconscious darkness and subjected to the luminous power of the superconscious being. The third suggestion hinted by the Vedic legend is that this rescue of the supreme light hidden in the unconscious darkness by the Indra, the divine mind from above, suggests some sort of a descent of the light involving a hidden below. Again, above and below. And the fusion of the descending light from above and the ascending light from below, affecting the supreme spiritual transformation. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So, here we have an obvious connection to that whole idea of as above, so below. And we see this in Egyptian texts. We see this in the Bible. We see this in different ways. So here it is, in the Vedas itself. These are some of the unique and original Vedic intuitions concealed behind the symbolic legends of the lost herds of the sun. Sri Aurobindo in his epic Savitri sums up a few beautiful and exquisite verses, the central idea behind the Vedic legend of the sun. And, I guess I'll read this for you guys. The treasure was found of a supernal day. In the deep subconscious glowed their jewel lamp. Lifted, it showed the riches of the cave, where by the miser traffickers of sense, unused, guarded beneath night's dragon paws, in folds of velvet darkness draped they sleep, whose priceless value could have saved the world. A darkness carrying morning in its breast, looked for the eternal wide, returning gleam, waiting the advent of a larger ray and rescue of the lost herds of the sun, in a splendid extravagance of the waste of God, dropped carelessly in creation's spendthrift work, left in the chantiers of the bottomless world, and stolen by the robbers of the deep, the golden shekels of the eternal lie, hoarded from touch and view and thought's desire, locked in blind entrees of the ignorant flood, let man should find them and be given as gods, unquote. Now, one of the very interesting things here that I just wanted to also point out is that, and we're going to look into, again, the sort of, because there's, like all these different texts, and it doesn't matter what you're looking at, right? You can look at texts from, say, Mari in the Mesopotamian area during the Bronze Age, or the Amarna letters, or the Ugarit Vedic pantheon, and all that kind of stuff. You see these, you see the kind of evolution of religions, and you know, it very much reflects what happens in their real life. And so you see like certain gods will overtake other gods because that's sort of the way things happen in life, and that's why they call some of their gods kings, and they have this whole setup like a pantheon as if it's some kind of, you know, royal family of some sort. So it's always really important to pay attention to a lot of that, because that's present in these texts, and obviously it's written just like I mentioned earlier. A lot of these you know, Vedic legends and stories have a very pastoral feeling to them, because that was part of their lifestyle, and then their ruling hierarchy is obviously you know, exposed in the myths themselves as well. So we always have to pay attention to that. So one of the things I find very interesting is that they claim that the Panis, who, you know, in these stories are their enemies, and eventually they'll be called Malechas. And one of the things about the Panis is that you have this Vedic book called the books called, or text called the Upanishads. And I was reading a book not too long ago that, and I don't remember which one it was, but it sort of connected the Upanishads with the Panis themselves. And one of the things that's very interesting too is that when the Aryans came, they did not do any kind of Shiva worship or anything like that, but that existed there at the time, and eventually it became morphed into what is known as Hinduism. And so the original Vedic religion versus what became Hinduism definitely changed. One of the things I find terribly interesting about the Upanishads is that if we look here, it's, you know, it says here, it's the late Vedic Sanskrit texts of religious teachings and ideas still revered in Hinduism. They are the most recent part of the oldest scriptures of Hinduism, the Vedas, that deal with meditation, philosophy, ontological knowledge, and other parts of the Vedas dealing with mantras, benedictions, rituals, ceremonies, and sacrifices. Among the most important literature of the history of Indian religions and culture, the Upanishads played an important role in the development of spiritual ideas in ancient India, marking a transition from Vedic ritualism to new ideas and institutions. Of all Vedic literature, the Upanishads alone are widely known, and their essential ideas are the spiritual core of Hinduism. Let's just put that into perspective here. Okay, now we're going to go down what Wikipedia says here about the etymology, and we're going to do a little etymology trick ourselves to see what we come up with. So etymology, the Sanskrit term Upanisad, from upa, by, and nisad, sit down, translates to sitting down near, quote, sitting down near, unquote, referring to the student sitting down near the teacher while receiving spiritual knowledge. And that's from this perspective. Another perspective is another dictionary meaning including, quote, esoteric doctrine, unquote, and secret doctrine, quote, unquote. Monier Williams' Sanskrit dictionary notes, quote, according to native authorities, Upanishad means setting to rest ignorance by revealing the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit, unquote. Adi Shankara explains in his commentary on the Katha Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that the word Amavidya, that is, quote, knowledge of the self, unquote, or Brahmavidya, knowledge of Brahma, the word appears in the verses of many Upanishads, such as the 4th verse of the 13th volume in first chapter of the Chandogyoga Upanishad. Max Muller, as well as Paul Deussen, translated the word Upanishad in the verses as, quote, secret doctrine, unquote. Robert Hume translated it as, quote, mystic meaning, unquote, while Patrick Olivelle translated it as, quote, hidden connections, unquote. So as you see, these are all scholars, some of them native, some of them not, but none of them seem to really agree with what Upanishads means. So, and you can spell it with an H or you can spell it with the S, and here I have it just spelled with the S. We have Upanisads, Upanishad, philosophical writings forming part of the Vedas, knowledge portion of the Vedas, 108 Sanskrit treatises that embody the philosophy of the Vedas, considered the most significant philosophical sections and crest jewels of the Vedas. The Upanishads are found in the Aranyaka and Brahmana portions of the Veda. So, here we have and so the word Pani doesn't really come up with anything, but when I put Upani in, this is what I get. And this is a Sanskrit translator. Okay, so Upani, Upanayati, to initiate, which I find extremely interesting, because one of the things we're going to see is that in the idea of initiation, quote unquote, is going to be a theme that will actually run, and we'll be able to actually see the different types of quote unquote initiation. But this is interesting. So what else does it say here? Okay. All right. So, and then if I just put in sad. And so sad is to sit down, but it also means here, as we see, sad guru, a bona fide spiritual teacher, which is extremely interesting. I find that to be fascinating. Sad guru, true guru, okay? So what if this actually means true initiate, or truly initiated, or one to be truly initiated? If I go back here, to initiate. So to initiate truly might be actually what the Upanishads mean. And, I'm just throwing it out there. I may be completely wrong about this, but because all these other people have these different ideas, I'm saying might not be incorrect. And I think it's fascinating that the Upanisads actually have the name of the Panis as part of as part of this book, and then the Rig Veda, it's literally telling you that they hold the knowledge, that they quote unquote stole the secret knowledge, the light of God or whatever else, and were hiding it under ignorance, which obviously is in the cave. Which all of this is still just allegorical, but I think it's very fascinating. And another fascinating thing is that the very first Upanisads is called Isa Upanishad, or Isavasya Upanishad, right? And so if we go back here and I type in, and this is going to be directly related into the Bhavishya Purana video I just did, you guys, but if I type in Isa into this is what I get. Supreme Lord. Lord, the name of one of the Upanishads, which treats of spiritual identity or unity. Isa, Lord. Isa, the supreme personality of Godhead. I mean, again, and they called Jesus Isa, and in the actual Purana, the Bhavishya Purana itself, he is called Isa, and so it is what it is. I think this is To me, it's definitely a very fascinating, interesting connection, because as we roll this out and we start to see the division between the Vedic Aryans who came in and sort of invaded India versus the people who were there and ended up losing to a lot of the Vedic Aryans, many of them left and went into the Levant and went into other places and became many of these ancient civilizations that we call different names today. So, there you go. That's a little touch. The next video is going to be, I think, a little bit more about maybe some of the historical aspects of it and looking at the same texts. And we're also going to start looking into some of these philosophical and religious aspects of this as well. So I hope you guys can join me for that. If you haven't seen the Bhavishya Purana video, please check it out. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe, because I'm going to have a whole lot more coming out. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Peace and love to you all. Till the next time.